What's going on with Snowden? Is this for real, or?
Very good question. Certainly, it's pretty striking. I mean, Eric Holder was the Attorney General.
Yeah.
In charge of leak investigations, and as you know, we've discussed in the past, there were more under his watch at the Justice Department than any previous administration. And of course, he brought the charges against Edward Snowden, criminal complaint charging him with 3 felony violations of the Espionage Act. Considered pretty serious at the time. This is just 2 years ago when Edward Snowden's disclosures first became public. And here is Holder in his first interview after leaving the Justice Department, taking his new job as a private lawyer, Covington and Burling, and said Snowden's disclosures spurred a necessary debate, that's Holder's word, that changed policies. President Obama and Congress ended bulk collection of telephone records, which was the first and most important of Snowden's disclosures, and he now sees the possibility of a deal that, he says, could satisfy everybody, and that obviously includes Snowden himself, who is in exile in Moscow and being celebrated around the world as a international whistleblower and man of conscience. So to have Holder say that so recently after leaving the administration is, I think, raised a lot of eyebrows. Now, the next question which you're going to ask is, well, does that mean a deal is in the works? It's very hard to say, but if you read through the story we posted on Yahoo the other day, very interesting. Robert Litt, who is the chief counsel to James Clapper, director of national intelligence, has privately floated a possible deal by which Snowden comes home, pleads guilty to 1 felony, gets 3 to 5 years in prison plus cooperation. That ain't going to fly with Snowden and his team now while they're riding high, but it is an indication that there are at least people in the government thinking about some way to resolve this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, and I should have too, that this interview was with Yahoo News, correct? I mean,
yes. I interviewed him on Monday.
And you're the one who
first day.
Who broke the story. I'm sorry I didn't say that right up front. Now, and you also mentioned this, which I thought was very significant. He admits that a lot of good has come out of what Snowden did, right? He broke the law. He broke the law. But we have this big conversation. We've had legislation. We've had congressional hearings. We had a presidential commission, right?
Yeah. It is hard to think of a individual comparable to Snowden, whether you want to call him a whistleblower or not, who has had as big an impact on public policy as he has had.
Except Daniel Ellsberg, maybe.
Well, you'd have to go back to Daniel Ellsberg, and Daniel Ellsberg didn't by himself end the Vietnam War.
That's right.
So, not to diminish.
But I have to tell you, I have raised this issue, Michael, several times at the White House press briefings.
Yeah.
And others have asked us directly of President Obama at one of the news conferences. What Holder said. He didn't praise Snowden, but even admitting that some good came out of what he did, that's more than I have heard from anybody else in the administration. Nobody else is willing to admit that.
I interviewed, for this story, Ben Wisner of the ACLU, who is Snowden's lawyer, and said, we haven't gotten this much respect from anybody at this level before. He found Holder's comments significant. Now, as I say, there's still a long way to go, and working through it, it's very hard to say because there are still people in the intelligence community who are just furious about what Snowden did, and thinking it through. I mean, what kind of message does it send to everybody else in the government if a deal were to be cut with Snowden? How do you bring another leak case against anybody? Because nobody has leaked the quantity of highly sensitive government documents that Snowden did. So, there's you could see a lot of heartburn at the Justice Department, within the intelligence community, trying to figure out how you give some kind of leniency to Snowden and set what the standard is going to be going into the future on matters like this.
The question I had when I first read your story is, has Eric Holder had this conversation, or did he have this conversation on the way out with Loretta Lynch?
Yeah, well, he wouldn't go there, and I did get a comment from the chief spokeswoman for Loretta Lynch, who said our position hasn't changed. Now, you would kind of expect that. My gut is that Loretta Lynch is a pretty tough cookie. In my very limited exposure to her and watching her record as U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn, she's no pushover, and I think she would probably be a pretty tough sell for a deal with Snowden, but we'll see. We'll see. This has got a few beats to play out, and because at some point, here's the thing: for Snowden, he's living the high life in Moscow. There are people building statues of him around the world. He's given Skype interviews for money to international conferences. He's got his girlfriend there from Hawaii cooking him dinner. He's living pretty well. As long as Putin doesn't mind him staying there, he could stay quite a while in Moscow.
Yeah, but he's still
real incentive to come home.
He's still in Moscow. Let's not forget that. He's still in Moscow. Now, Michael,
she cooks him dinner, but she's cooking him horse meat. So.
Well, this is great. Great work on this as always. We'll keep in touch with you on this because you're right. There's several beats to play out here before we see the end of this story. This is just the beginning of it.